As I learn more about economics, I realize a lot of the terms that are used are meant to obfuscate the truth. Today we'll be going over what yield curve control is and why it matters to you. My name's Eric. This is Above My Pay Grade. Let's get into it. All right, guys. Here on Above My Pay Grade, if you don't know, you're on a journey with me to learn about economics. I'm no expert, but I'm learning as I go. And I learn things with digestible real-world words and examples, and I hope to bring that to people as well, and then talk about why it's important. Because honestly, it is simple, a lot of it, but people try to obfuscate the truth a lot. So kind of a one-off real quick. I heard something interesting the other day, another example of government hypocrisy. Probably in your area, just like mine, the government raises taxes on things like cigarettes and gas with the express intention of lowering the use of those items to get people to stop smoking or use less fuel. However, this idea doesn't carry over to labor. So when for some reason, they think we can do that and it will lower the use of those things. But if we raise taxes on labor, for instance, people will still work the same amount. It doesn't make... Those two things can't both be true. You raise taxes here, it lowers the use. Raise taxes there, everything stays the same. Both can't be true. So I thought that was an interesting take I heard over yesterday. But I digress. Yield curve control. So first thing to understand is what a bond is. Bond is government debt that the U.S. government sells on the open market. The rate on a bond, let's say it's a 10-year $1,000 bond, goes up and down. The rate, as in the interest rate, goes up if demand goes down. And if demand goes up, the rate goes down. That kind of makes sense, because if people want to get into bonds, they don't need to have a competitive rate. But if people don't want to get into bonds because there's better things out there, then you have to incentivize people to buy bonds by raising the interest rate. Makes sense? Pretty simple. Now, bonds are kind of an open market, and that interest rate fluctuates up and down. But you've probably heard of the yield curve, and that is simply the government sells a variety of bonds with different maturity dates, 2-year, 10-year, 30-year, etc. And if you were to lock up your money for longer, i.e. 30 years versus 2 years, it would make sense that that's more risky, and therefore you'd want better returns. So typically, a 2-year bond interest rate is here, 10 years here, 30 years up here. So that's the yield curve. And here's the problem with open market economics. When you have math illiterate people spending money in the government, they can't afford high interest rates. They can't afford it. And so if you look at bonds today, the 10-year yield was in, I think, the 2s or something. I don't own bonds, but the reason I don't own them is inflation. If inflation is here and bond rates are here, the only guarantee is that you'll get your money back with 2% interest over the 10 years. So you're guaranteed to lose money and then get the $1,000 back at the end of the 10 years. I don't see how that would incentivize me to buy a bond. You tell me if you own bonds and why in the comments, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to own a bond if it's just a contract, so it's guaranteed. The interest rate doesn't fluctuate up and down once you buy it. So they have to incentivize a person like me. If the interest rate was at like 20%, 15%, that's more interesting because you can beat inflation, right? But the government can't afford this. So if demand goes down, and there's a lot of people like me who are like, I don't want to buy bonds because interest rate isn't even beating inflation. So what happens? People don't buy bonds. So remember, the interest rate goes up to incentivize people to buy more. Government can't afford that. So what happens is the Federal Reserve comes in, prints money out of this door, comes in, buys bonds, and if demand goes up for bonds, remember the interest rate goes down. So they buy bonds with fake money that they print out of thin air to keep that interest rate down. So the government can keep borrowing money at a low interest rate. Here is the problem. You're probably thinking that, I don't know what the knock-on effects are of that, but if you're wondering, a test case, just watch Japan. Japan is doing this right now. And so I think a lot of these things that you'll see the United States do, there'll be a lot of test cases to watch in smaller markets to see what they're doing, because every other country in the world, every first world country has been doing the printing thing just like us. So what are the problems with this? So a lot of market, if you think of the market as millions of individuals making decisions that are best for themselves, it's this organic thing, right? And people use price signals to have a barometer for risk. If that makes sense. So why would you be in the stock market if you can have a guaranteed interest rate in the bond market that beats inflation? Most people wouldn't. If you could guarantee that you're not going to lose money or lose purchasing power and buy bonds, most people would be in the bond market. However, if that market is distorted, it distorts the equities market as well, because people have to take on more risk to get a yield that beats inflation. And this has knock-on effects in the housing market. This basically distorts price signals in the economy, and you probably do this subconsciously, but you think about price signals all the time. Why do you say when you go shopping, that's expensive? Think about that for yourself. Why do you say that? Is that because you've seen it somewhere else for cheaper? Right? So we think about this subconsciously, and price signals are extremely important for having a barometer for risk. And what the Federal Reserve is trying to do, and all these governments around the world, is take control of the economy and think all these millions of people who make individual decisions that are best for themselves and their family, they're going to take those price signals away and distort the market even further. Okay? So I think that's why I always say this is a currency crisis. So we're in this place where we can't pay off the debt, and the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are going to start making drastic decisions that you've probably never seen in your life, including more stimmy checks, UBI, to prop up our economy. Our economy isn't based on anything but free money and consumption. It's not production. There is production, right? But there's a lot of what they call zombie companies out there, meaning they're not profitable, but since they're able to keep that money printer going and borrow and borrow and borrow, they're able to prop themselves up. So, bottom line, yield curve control is not good. Okay. Will the United States do it? I think so. Eventually. I think, again, if you look at some of these emerging markets, they're going to be the test case for what the United States is going to start doing. So I think Europe will do it first, and then the United States will do it. So just crazy stuff. But practically speaking, I want to start, somebody in the comments the other day said, he said, give us some practical advice. What do you do about this? All I can tell you is what I'm doing. And everyone's situation is different. Everyone's risk tolerance is different as well. I'm going to do a video on, a longer video on Bitcoin. That's one of my favorite hedges against this. I do buy gold and silver as well. And then be in a place where you're not in a lot of debt, if you can get there. I think house debt is good because it inflates away, especially if you have a super low interest rate. Getting into a new house, personally, I've looked at investment properties, etc. One of the things I want to do is have an Airbnb. I live in Colorado. I want to get an Airbnb out in the mountains. But one of the things that's happening here, especially after COVID, is a lot of municipalities are starting to make it very difficult to run an Airbnb, because that's part of the reason why housing is going up so much. It's because people own second homes in these mountain towns, which is understandable. But my big one is Bitcoin, which I very much like. And then always being in a position where you could take advantage of dips in the market. So I have a pretty big cash position as well. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.